She dialed the police on her new neighbor, never suspecting she had just reported the deputy director of the FBI. Have you ever noticed how certain people convince themselves they govern the very pavement beneath your feet? Not by legal right, but in the silent decree of their own imagination, self-appointed gatekeepers of their realm. They catalog every face, track every motion, and if you happen to slip outside their mental census, suddenly you don't belong. You become suspect. That is Clarice Whitman, 52 years old, firmly rooted on Poplar Drive in Plano, Texas. And if you dared to ask her, she'd assure you she was the neighborhood's unofficial mayor. It was a Saturday, heavy with sunlight and thickened air. Clarice reigned from her porch like a monarch surveying her dominion. A pair of binoculars stationed on the wicker table beside her glass of tart lemonade. Yes, binoculars. A floral sun hat veiled her pale brow, shielding her face as she performed her favorite pastime. Vigilant observation. She always observed. That's when she spotted her. A black woman, mid-40s, lean and composed, reclined by the pool of the corner house that had sold a mere 3 weeks earlier. Dark green swimsuit, sunglasses resting on her nose, paperback novel poised on her stomach. Her hair was drawn back into a sleek, tight puff. She exuded serenity, far too much for Clarice's liking. Clarice edged forward in her chair. She hadn't witnessed a moving van, no neighborly barbecue, no welcome wagon, not even a perfunctory wave of greeting. And now this woman sprawled poolside, basking as though she owned the place? The audacity. Clarice snatched her phone and narrowed her eyes against the sun, scrutinizing the figure once more. Something didn't sit right. Her fingers hovered over the non-emergency contact. She hesitated, just a breath, then firmed her jaw and tapped call. Collin County Police Dispatch. What's your emergency? Clarice's voice shifted, laced in that sugary, smooth tone reserved for customer complaints and performative concern. Hi, yes, I'm calling from Poplar Drive. I believe someone might be trespassing. There's a woman at the old Henderson property, in the backyard near the pool. I don't believe she resides there. Can you describe her? She's, black, mid-40s, I suppose, wearing a swimsuit, just laying there like she lives there. I don't recognize her at all. A pause stretched from the dispatcher. Any signs of forced entry? No, Clarice admitted, then quickly added, but you never know. She might have scaled the fence. Maybe someone forgot to latch the back gate. Clarice lowered the phone and peered again. The woman casually sipped her drink and turned a page in her book, entirely unbothered, entirely unhurried. No furtive glances, no skittish movement. That calm made Clarice more uneasy, not less. She just looks out of place, Clarice tacked on. The dispatcher gathered her information. 2 officers were dispatched. Estimated arrival, 8 minutes. Clarice settled her phone on the table and crossed her arms tightly across her chest. Her gaze locked unwaveringly on the woman, waiting, willing for some incriminating sign to reveal itself. Anything to vindicate her instincts. Yet nothing transpired. The woman simply luxuriated in her afternoon, comfortably ensconced like she had every right to be there. But Clarice had already rendered her verdict. She didn't belong. What Clarice didn't realize that day, however, was that she wasn't the only person paying close attention, and she was about to discover, in the most humbling fashion, that not everyone suffers baseless assumptions quietly. Clarice had dwelled on Poplar Drive for 19 years, long enough to watch entire lifetimes cycle through the cul-de-sac. Families arrived and departed, lawns shriveled, then thrived. Children morphed into teenagers and peeled away in battered secondhand cars. To her mind, she was the steward of neighborhood standards. If garbage bins weren't tucked away by dusk, if blades of grass dared exceed 2 inches, if Halloween skeletons lingered past November 5th, Clarice noticed, And Clarice remembered. The corner property had belonged to the Hendersons, a kindly retired couple who eventually traded Texas for Arizona when arthritic winters grew intolerable. Clarice had baked them a bundt cake when they moved in. She never retrieved her pan. She remembered that too. She recalled the for sale sign disappearing, blinds staying drawn for a week or two, then slow signs of occupancy, a vehicle in the drive, porch lights flickering on sporadically. Clarice had glimpsed a woman once or twice, maybe the same woman, slipping in and out swiftly, always alone. No greetings, no neighborhood email introductions, just quiet activity in the periphery. That grated on Clarice. Around here, people said hello. They declared themselves. There was a rhythm to suburban life, a choreography. And this woman was offbeat. She wasn't alone in her suspicions either. Clarice had exchanged words with Carol Ferguson down the street. She keeps to herself, Carol murmured over the phone one afternoon. And you know what that usually means. Clarice did know. Or rather, she thought she did. So when she made that call to dispatch, it wasn't just about the woman on the lounger. It was about the shift she symbolized, the disruption of an old, unspoken order. Still, an unease prickled in the recesses of Clarice's mind. What if she had miscalculated? She banished the thought. Rising from her chair, she crept behind the tall hedgerow lining her yard to gain a clearer vantage of the Hendersons. No, the woman's backyard. Sunlight shimmered off the rippling pool. Soft jazz spilled from hidden outdoor speakers, and the woman's head nodded subtly to the rhythm. Clarice squinted. The patio furniture gleamed, upscale and immaculate. The stainless steel grill sparkled, clearly top of the line. Not a weed blemished the landscaping. No shrub ran wild. She's either a professional cleaner, Clarice muttered to herself, or the sentence fractured, unfinished. Precisely 8 minutes after her call, a black and white squad car coasted slowly down Poplar Drive. Another followed. Clarice smoothed her blouse and sauntered forward as though she were simply tending to her flowers. The first officer, tall, tan-skinned, square-jawed, stepped out and swept his gaze over the scene. "Are you the caller, ma'am?" Clarice mustered a benign smile, adopting a tone of casual helpfulness. "Yes, that's her right there, in the backyard." The officer peered through the slats in the fence. His partner drifted toward the side gate, unlocked. Both men eased into the yard, cautious but not stealthy. Clarice lingered behind, her pulse unexpectedly quickening. Perhaps she had finally been vindicated, but behind that fence, someone had already risen, and it wasn't the officers catching her unaware. It was Danielle Monroe. Danielle had heard the subtle squeak of the gate before their shadows stretched long beside her pool. She lifted her sunglasses just enough to meet their eyes, one hand resting lightly on the armrest of her chair, fingers coiled around her glass of iced tea. Calm, steady, unflinching, like a woman who had prepared for this precise scene. "Ma'am," one officer called evenly, "we're responding to a report of trespassing. Can we have a word?" Danielle rose gracefully. Her book slid from her lap onto the adjacent seat. She inhaled deeply, set her drink on the patio table, and stood tall, every motion deliberate, composed. "I live here," she declared, voice firm but measured. "This is my residence." The taller officer, badge glinting with the name R. Ortega, shifted awkwardly. "We got a call from a neighbor who wasn't sure. Do you have identification, ma'am?" Danielle tilted her head slightly, an eyebrow arched. "Of course I do." She strode to the patio cabinet, opened it, and retrieved a leather tote. Unhurried without a hint of panic, she unzipped an interior pocket and locked eyes with Officer Ortega. "Just out of curiosity," she asked mildly, Do you routinely ask people sunbathing in their own backyards for ID, or only those who resemble me? The younger officer, Perry, pale and likely no older than 30, looked visibly uncomfortable. It's just standard procedure, ma'am. Nothing personal, he murmured. Danielle's smile was tight, edged with exhaustion. It's always nothing personal until it is. She withdrew her wallet, flipped it open directly to her badge, and let it gleam in the sun. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Deputy Director Ortega blinked, recoiled half a step. Danielle remained motionless, observing them. Not triumphant, not incensed, just bone-weary. I purchased this property 3 weeks ago, she stated coolly. I moved in last Friday. I've been too occupied preparing Senate Intelligence Committee testimony in Washington to socialize. Today was my first afternoon off. I intended to enjoy my own backyard. Forgive me if I didn't anticipate guests. Perry cleared his throat awkwardly. We didn't know, ma'am. Our apologies. Someone just called it in. Danielle reclined onto her lounger and retrieved her book. Let me guess. White woman, short brown hair, binoculars on the porch? Ortega remained silent, but his eyes betrayed him. Danielle gave a knowing nod. Figures. A pause enveloped them. Neither officer knew how to proceed. The silence stretched long and thin until Danielle spoke again, her tone cool and final. Tell her she can stop surveilling me now, and maybe clean her own yard before she concerns herself with mine. Ortega muttered a subdued apology, nodded curtly, and both men retreated, the gate clicking softly shut behind them. Back on her porch, Clarice stood rigid, arms locked, lemonade glass clutched like a talisman. Her gaze darted toward the officers' retreating backs, but they never spared her a glance. They simply re-entered their cruisers and pulled away. Clarice's stomach pitched. That woman wasn't an intruder. She was the owner. And not just anyone, someone formidable. But this wasn't a fleeting embarrassment. It was the catalyst for a reckoning Clarice could no longer contain. And soon her entire neighborhood would feel its tremors. Clarice stood transfixed on her porch, lemonade forgotten in her hand. Her face flushed, not from the oppressive Texas sun, but from something else entirely. Shame, perhaps, or something far more unsettling. The woman, Danielle, remained where she was, comfortably seated now, a book resting lightly in her hands, as though the earlier commotion had evaporated into nothingness. As though Clarice hadn't attempted to unravel her peaceful afternoon with a single impulsive phone call. Clarice stepped quietly into her house and closed the door behind her. The blast of air conditioning hit her skin with a chill that felt sharper than she remembered. She crossed to the kitchen and placed her glass down on the counter, then stood motionless, rooted in place as the weight of the moment settled heavily upon her. Deputy Director of the FBI. The words spun relentlessly inside her mind, clattering like a stone tumbling inside a dryer. Eventually, she drifted into the living room, picked up her tablet with trembling hands and tapped out a search. Danielle R. Monroe, FBI. The results populated instantly. Photographs appeared. Danielle standing beside senators, delivering press statements with poise, attending high-security briefings with a guarded expression. Appointed merely 3 months prior, a veteran federal agent, Ivy League educated, decorated for distinguished undercover work, she had resided, albeit briefly, in Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Phoenix. Clarice's eyes stayed locked on the screen as her complexion slowly drained of color. She wasn't merely mistaken. She had been disastrously, unmistakably, publicly wrong. Loud and wrong, and worst of all, the entire ordeal had been avoidable. Her phone vibrated against the counter. A message from Carol. Heard the cops were on your street. Everything okay? Clarice didn't answer. Instead, she opened Facebook and began scrolling mindlessly, dread coiling tightly in her stomach. It was inevitable that someone would have posted about it by now. Someone always did. And there it was. A blurry photograph captured surreptitiously through a backyard fence. Two police officers, a woman clad in a swimsuit, holding what unmistakably appeared to be a badge. The caption beneath it read, "When the new neighbor turns out to be a boss." The comments were far worse. "Y'all really called the cops on the FBI. LOL. This is why folks mind their business. Poplar Drive about to end up on the news." Clarice laid the tablet gently on the coffee table. Everything inside her felt disjointed now. Her pulse had slowed but grown heavier, as though her chest had been stuffed with thick cotton, suffocating and dense. The house, her refuge, her meticulously curated sanctuary, suddenly felt diminished, constricted. The doorbell rang. Clarice flinched, her entire body tensing involuntarily. Her feet remained immobile, anchored to the floor for several seconds longer than necessary, before she finally compelled herself to move toward the door. Peering cautiously through the peephole, she saw Danielle Monroe standing on the other side. No sunglasses this time. Just her face, calm, composed, inscrutable. Clarice opened the door halfway. Danielle didn't hesitate. "Good afternoon," she said evenly, her voice steady. "I thought it would be best if we spoke face to face." Clarice parted her lips to respond, but her voice deserted her. Danielle went on. "You called the cops on me. I know it was you. I understand. You saw someone unfamiliar, made an assumption, and believed you were acting responsibly." Clarice swallowed hard, her throat dry and constricted. I didn't know," she faltered. "That I lived here?" Danielle interjected gently, one eyebrow lifting. "Or that someone like me could live here?" A deep blush surged to Clarice's cheeks. She scrambled mentally for the right words, but none would rise to the surface. Danielle held her gaze unwaveringly. "I didn't come here to scold you," she continued softly. "I've endured enough of that in my life. I only wanted you to see me, truly see me. Because next time, it might not be someone with a badge and a title. It might be a teenager, or a delivery driver, or someone simply trying to breathe for 5 minutes without being accused of breaking into their own existence." Clarice's eyes dropped to the floor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Danielle did not say, "It's okay." She did not offer immediate absolution. Instead, she gave a single, deliberate nod. "I'll be back at work next week," Danielle concluded. "Until then, I'd like to enjoy my home, without binoculars trained on me." With that, she turned and walked away, her steps measured and unhurried. But this story wasn't finished, not remotely, because when someone rattles the foundation of a neighborhood like Poplar Drive, people either evolve from it or entrench themselves deeper. Clarice was about to discover which way her community's wind was blowing. Sunday morning arrived differently. Clarice awoke with a dull, throbbing headache, the kind born of relentless overthinking and fractured, restless sleep. She shuffled into the kitchen, brewed a strong pot of coffee, and made a point to avoid the living room windows as though they radiated poison. She didn't want to glance across the street, didn't want to catch a sight of Danielle's backyard, didn't want to confront her own reflection staring back at her in the glass. By 9 a.m., her phone had already buzzed 4 times. The group chat with Carol and 2 other neighbors was flaring nonstop. Carol: "So it's true? She's FBI?" Janice: "I saw her at the corner market once." Real quiet, kept to herself. Eleanor: "Why'd you call the cops, though, Clarice?" Clarice didn't reply. What could she possibly say? That she panicked? That she convinced herself she was performing her civic duty? That she mistook serenity and solitude for something illicit? Outside, a few neighbors strolled past her house. On any ordinary day, they would have waved cheerily, smiled in passing. Today, they averted their gazes. Their faces remained neutral, their steps brisk. Later that afternoon, Clarice gathered the nerve to walk to her mailbox. The sun blazed high above, but her skin felt chilled, as though her blood coursed slower than usual. As she reached for the bundled envelopes, a voice carried from across the street. "Afternoon." It was Mr. Singh, the neighbor who lived 3 doors down, the man with the aging blue pickup and the faded bumper sticker, a retired math teacher. usually warm and affable. Clarice turned toward him, preparing to return the greeting. But something in his tone halted her. He didn't smile. He didn't lift a hand. "A lot of people are talking," he said flatly. "I told my daughter to Google your name. Figured if someone's going to call the cops over sunbathing, she ought to know what kind of neighborhood she's visiting." Clarice parted her lips, but Mr. Singh had already turned on his heel and walked away. Inside, she sank heavily into her dining room chair and gazed out through the front window. Her block, the community she had long prided herself on keeping orderly and secure, was now shifting around her, moving without her, as though she had been gently but decisively ejected from the current. The doorbell rang again. Clarice froze. It wasn't Danielle this time. It was Officer Ortega. She opened the door cautiously. "Good afternoon, Ms. Whitman," he greeted her, polite but formal. "I just wanted to follow up about yesterday's call and clarify a few things." Clarice blinked uncertainly. "Okay?" "You should know," he said calmly, "that every time a report is filed like that, especially when there's no crime, no genuine threat, and it turns out to be unfounded, it's recorded and flagged." Her posture stiffened. "Flagged?" she echoed, her voice brittle. He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am. Because if it develops into a pattern, the person submitting those calls can be investigated for harassment or discrimination, depending on the circumstances." Clarice remained silent. Ortega's gaze held steady, not cruel, not vindictive, but unwavering and clear. "I'm not here to chastise you," he said evenly, "but I think it's time you reflect deeply on what compelled you to make that call and whom you believed you were protecting this neighborhood from." With a respectful nod, he turned and walked back to his cruiser. Clarice closed the door gently behind him. Her heartbeat hammered against her rib cage. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. The boundary between watching out and watching over had blurred. For so long, she had convinced herself she was the vigilant guardian of Poplar Drive. But now it was evident that people were safeguarding themselves from her. Yet sometimes the most agonizing reckoning isn't public shame. It is the quiet confrontation of uncomfortable truths within one's own soul. Clarice was about to sit in that discomfort, whether she welcomed it or not.